Exactly 2 years after Elon Musk walked into Twitter headquarters carrying a kitchen sink and a $44 billion price tag. Tonight, he walks into a London television studio carrying something far heavier. The weight of what many consider the most expensive mistake in business history. The man who revolutionized electric vehicles, who sent rockets to space, who promised to colonize Mars, now sits in a chair that costs less than the hourly losses his social media platform generates. X, formerly Twitter, has become a case study in how ego can destroy empires and how good intentions can pave the road to digital hell. Piers sits across from him with the calculated patience of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. On his desk lies a documentation that reads like an autopsy report. Advertiser flight data, user exodus statistics, misinformation proliferation studies, and financial projections that would make even the world's richest man uncomfortable. This isn't just another celebrity interview. This is a reckoning with the most powerful man in technology, conducted in front of a global audience that has watched his digital empire burn in real time. Every tweet, every policy change, every midnight decision has been documented, analyzed, and weaponized by critics who believe Musk has fundamentally broken one of the world's most important communication platforms. The studio is silent except for the low hum of cameras that are worth less than the amount X loses every hour. Outside, protesters from both sides gather. Free speech absolutists who worship Musk as a digital liberator, and democracy advocates who view him as an existential threat to civilized discourse. Tonight, the man who claims to have bought Twitter to save civilization will be forced to confront what his critics call the near destruction of it. The silence stretches on for exactly 13 seconds before Piers delivers the opening salvo that will define the next 2 hours. Elon, Piers begins, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated evidence. 2 years ago, you paid $44 billion for Twitter. Today, most analysts value X at approximately $12 billion. That's a $32 billion loss. How do you explain that to your investors? Musk shifts slightly in his chair, but his famous confidence remains intact. His gray t-shirt, deliberately casual in a way that screams calculated rebellion, bears no visible logos, as if he's trying to distance himself from the corporate world that built his fortune. Value is more than financial metrics, Piers, Musk responds, his voice carrying the slight accent that betrays his South African origins. When we acquired Twitter, we weren't buying a profit center. We were buying the digital town square of humanity. And that has value beyond any balance sheet. The deflection is smooth, transforming a business failure into a philosophical mission. But Piers has spent decades watching powerful men justify their mistakes through grandiose rhetoric. The digital town square of humanity, Piers repeats slowly. That's a remarkable phrase. But town squares are supposed to bring people together, aren't they? Since your acquisition, X has lost approximately 60% of its daily active users. Major brands have fled the platform. The European Union is threatening regulatory action. How is that bringing humanity together? Each fact lands with surgical precision. Musk's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly, the first crack in his composed facade. Legacy media and establishment institutions don't like platforms they can't control. Musk responds, his voice gaining the passionate edge that characterizes his public rallies. What you call user flight, I call the natural evolution of a platform that refuses to bow to censorship pressure. Censorship pressure from whom? From governments that want to control narratives, from advertisers that want to sanitize discourse, from activist groups that believe they should determine what constitutes acceptable speech. Musk's hands become more animated as he speaks, gesturing with the intensity of someone who has rehearsed these arguments countless times. The paranoia embedded in his worldview is becoming visible, but it's wrapped in libertarian philosophy that makes it seem rational. So when Pfizer, Disney, Apple, and hundreds of other major advertisers left the platform, that was censorship rather than business decisions. When advertisers coordinate to pressure platforms into suppressing certain viewpoints, yes, that's a form of censorship. Musk's response is immediate, suggesting this is a core belief rather than a convenient excuse. Or, Piers counters, it's companies deciding they don't want their brands associated with hate speech, misinformation, and extremist content. Because that is what increased on the platform after your acquisition, isn't it? The question cuts to the heart of the free speech versus content moderation debate that has defined Musk's tenure. Define hate speech, Musk challenges. Define misinformation. Define extremist. Because what I've discovered is that these terms are almost always defined by whoever has the power to enforce them. And they're almost always used to suppress viewpoints that challenge established power structures. It's a sophisticated argument that transforms Musk from platform owner to free speech warrior. But Piers is prepared for this deflection. All right, let's be specific then, Piers says, reaching for his folder. After your acquisition, posts containing racial slurs increased by 1,200%. Holocaust denial content increased by 600%. Vaccine misinformation proliferated to the point where health officials called X a public health threat. Are you defending that as valuable discourse? The statistics hit like hammer blows, each number representing thousands of harmful posts that proliferated under Musk's watch. I'm defending the principle that bad speech should be countered with more speech, not censorship, Musk responds. But his conviction seems slightly shaken. When you start deciding which ideas are too dangerous for people to hear, you're not protecting them. You're infantilizing them. Even when those ideas get people killed? The question hangs in the air like an accusation. And for the first time, Musk seems genuinely caught off guard. That's a loaded question, Piers. Is it? Because we have documented cases of violence that can be traced directly to misinformation spread on your platform. Are you willing to accept responsibility for those consequences? The progression from abstract philosophy to concrete harm is forcing Musk to confront the real-world implications of his digital libertarianism. I accept responsibility for creating a platform where free speech can flourish, Musk says carefully. I don't accept responsibility for how individual users choose to exercise that freedom. It's a distinction that sounds reasonable in theory, but feels hollow when confronted with actual victims. We'll return to that, Piers promises. But first, I want to understand your decision-making process. Because from the outside, it appears that you've been running X like a personal blog rather than a global communication platform. Let's talk about your management style, Piers continues, pulling out a printed timeline. Since acquiring Twitter, you've made major platform decisions via late-night tweets. You've fired employees by tweet. You've announced policy changes via memes. You've engaged in public feuds with journalists, politicians, and your own advertisers. Does that strike you as responsible stewardship of a global communication platform? The criticism strikes at something deeper than business strategy. It challenges Musk's fundamental approach to power and decision-making. I believe in transparency and real-time communication, Musk responds. But there's a defensiveness in his voice that wasn't present earlier. Rather than having decisions made in secret by committees and focus groups, I prefer to think out loud and engage directly with users. Think out loud, Piers repeats. Is that what you were doing when you tweeted, "My pronouns are prosecute Fauci"? When you called someone a pedophile? When you posted conspiracy theories about Paul Pelosi's attack? Each example represents a different category of harmful content, and Musk's discomfort is increasingly visible. Context matters, Piers. Those tweets were responses to specific situations, specific provocations. What provocation justified calling Dr. Fauci a criminal? Piers interrupts sharply. What context makes it appropriate to spread conspiracy theories about a violent assault on an elderly man? The questions force Musk to defend specific statements rather than abstract principles, and the ground becomes much less solid. I believe Dr. Fauci made significant errors in judgment during the pandemic that cost lives and livelihoods. Musk responds, attempting to reframe personal attack as policy criticism. As for the Pelosi incident, I was raising questions about a story that seemed to have inconsistencies. Questions based on what expertise? What investigation? Or were you just amplifying conspiracy theories because they aligned with your political preferences? The suggestion that Musk's decision-making is driven by bias rather than principle clearly stings. I don't have political preferences in the traditional sense, Musk protests. I care about truth, about free inquiry, about not accepting official narratives at face value. But Elon, Piers leans forward. There's a difference between healthy skepticism and reckless conspiracy theorizing. When you have 150 million followers, when your tweets move markets and influence elections, don't you have an obligation to verify information before sharing it? The question of responsibility at scale is one that Musk has consistently avoided confronting directly. I have an obligation to be authentic, Musk responds. If I started self-censoring out of concern for how my words might be interpreted or misused, I would become just another sanitized corporate spokesperson. Authentic, Piers repeats. Is that what you call it when you promise to step down as CEO based on a Twitter poll? Then renege on that promise? When you claim to be politically neutral while clearly favoring one side? When you promise to ban bots but allow them to proliferate because they inflate your user numbers? The accusations of hypocrisy are coming faster now, each one backed by documented evidence of Musk's contradictory statements and actions. Running a platform during a transition period requires flexibility, Musk says weakly. Sometimes, immediate decisions need to be revisited as circumstances change. Flexibility or lack of planning? Piers presses. Because it seems like you bought Twitter without a clear strategy, fired most of the institutional knowledge, and then made it up as you went along. The management critique is devastating because it's so clearly accurate. Musk's expression suggests he knows it. Legacy institutions are resistant to change, Musk responds, falling back on his standard critique of established systems. Sometimes you have to break things before you can rebuild them better. Break things, Piers echoes. Let's talk about what you've broken, because it's not just Twitter's financials or user base. It's people's trust in digital platforms, in the possibility of civil discourse, in the idea that technology can be a force for good rather than division. The conversation is shifting from business criticism to moral reckoning, and Musk seems to sense the danger. That's a very pessimistic view of what we've accomplished, he says, his confidence visibly wavering for the first time. What exactly have you accomplished, Elon? Beyond losing $32 billion and creating a platform that most people now associate with toxicity and misinformation? Piers opens his folder fully now, and the rustle of papers seems amplified in the studio's tense atmosphere. Musk's eyes immediately focus on the documents, as if they contain evidence of crimes he committed while sleepwalking, which, metaphorically, they might. "I want to show you something," Piers says, his voice taking on the clinical tone of a prosecutor presenting evidence. "This is a study from Oxford University tracking the spread of misinformation on social media platforms before and after your acquisition of Twitter." He slides a chart across the desk, and Musk glances at it reluctantly. "In the 6 months before your takeover, false information about elections reached approximately 2 million users per day on Twitter. In the 6 months after, that number increased to 18 million users per day. That's a 900% increase. How do you explain that?" The statistic is staggering, and Musk's discomfort is palpable. "Correlation isn't causation," he responds, but his voice lacks conviction. "The increase in political content might reflect increased user engagement with important civic issues." "Important civic issues," Piers repeats. "Is that what you call false claims about voting machines being hacked? Fabricated stories about ballot harvesting? Conspiracy theories about election officials that led to death threats?" Each example transforms abstract statistics into concrete harm, and Musk looks increasingly uncomfortable. "I didn't create political polarization in America, Piers. I inherited a platform that was already dealing with these tensions." "But you did change how the platform handles them," Piers points out. "You fired the content moderation teams. You eliminated fact-checking labels. You reinstated accounts that had been banned for spreading false information. Those were your decisions." The progression from inherited problems to deliberate policy changes is undeniable, and Musk seems to recognize the trap he's walked into. "Content moderation was biased," he insists. "It was systematically suppressing conservative viewpoints while allowing liberal misinformation to flourish." Was it? Or was it simply that conservative content was more likely to violate platform rules against harassment, hate speech, and misinformation? The question challenges the fundamental premise of Musk's acquisition, that Twitter was unfairly censoring conservative voices rather than enforcing consistent standards. "The Hunter Biden laptop story was suppressed," Musk responds, falling back on his most frequently cited example. "That was clear evidence of political bias." "One story handled badly during a chaotic news cycle," Piers acknowledges. "Does that justify dismantling an entire content moderation system that was preventing demonstrable harm?" "It wasn't just one story." "Show me," Piers interrupts. "Show me the systematic evidence of anti-conservative bias that justified burning down the guardrails. Because what I see is a billionaire who was angry about being fact-checked and decided to buy the platform rather than accept accountability." The personal attack hits home, and Musk's composure finally begins to crack visibly. That's not what happened," he protests, but his denial sounds weak even to himself. "Isn't it? Because your own employees, former employees now, have described a boss who flew into rages when his tweets were labeled as misleading, who couldn't accept that his opinions might be wrong, who decided that rather than being subject to the same rules as everyone else, he would buy the platform and change the rules. The psychological profile being constructed is devastating because it rings true to anyone who has observed Musk's public behavior. "I bought Twitter to preserve free speech." "You bought Twitter because your ego couldn't handle being corrected," Piers interrupts ruthlessly. "And now you're watching the platform die because you prioritized your personal grievances over the public good." The accusation lands like a physical blow, and for a moment, Musk says nothing. When he finally responds, his voice is barely above a whisper. Maybe some of my motivations were personal. It's the first crack in his defensive wall, and Piers immediately recognizes its significance. Tell me about those personal motivations. I was frustrated with what felt like arbitrary and biased enforcement of platform rules. When my own content was restricted or labeled, it felt hypocritical given what I saw as obvious bias in favor of certain political viewpoints. The admission that personal frustration drove a $44 billion decision is staggering in its implications. So, you bought one of the world's most important communication platforms because you were angry about being fact-checked? It's more complicated than that. Is it? Because it sounds like the most expensive temper tantrum in human history. The studio seems to contract around the two men as the conversation reaches its crisis point. Musk sits hunched in his chair, looking smaller than his global reputation would suggest possible. The transformation from confident tech mogul to defensive defendant is complete. Elon, Piers says, his voice taking on an almost therapeutic quality. I want you to help me understand something. You've revolutionized electric vehicles. You've advanced space exploration. You've pushed the boundaries of what's possible in multiple industries. Why did Twitter defeat you? The question is designed to pierce through defensiveness by acknowledging Musk's legitimate accomplishments before addressing his failure. Musk looks up, his eyes reflecting a kind of vulnerability that hasn't been visible in his public appearances since the acquisition. Because, he begins slowly, social media is about human psychology, not engineering. And I understand engineering better than I understand people. The Saudi admission is profound in its simplicity and honesty. When I look at a rocket or a car, I can see exactly how it needs to be improved. The problems are technical, measurable, solvable through iteration and innovation. His voice gains strength as he talks about familiar territory. But human discourse, political polarization, the spread of misinformation, these are fundamentally different challenges. How so? Engineering problems have optimal solutions. Social problems have trade-offs. Musk's hands become more animated as he articulates the distinction. When I tried to apply engineering thinking to content moderation, I assumed there was a perfect balance point between free speech and harmful content. But there isn't. Every choice helps some people and hurts others. The sophistication of his analysis suggests he has done real thinking about why his approach failed. And you didn't understand that when you made the acquisition? I thought I could solve social problems the same way I solve technical problems, through first principles thinking and rapid iteration. But you can't A/B test democracy. You can't iterate on human trust. Some things, once broken, can't be easily repaired. The recognition that social systems operate by different rules than technical systems represents a fundamental shift in Musk's worldview. When did you realize that? When I started getting letters from teachers whose students were afraid to come to school because of harassment campaigns organized on the platform. When I saw families torn apart by conspiracy theories that had been amplified by algorithmic promotion. When I realized that free speech, without context or guardrails, can become a weapon against the vulnerable. Each example is personal and specific, suggesting that Musk has confronted individual cases of harm rather than just abstract statistics. What did those letters do to you? They made me understand that impact matters more than intention. I intended to create a platform where all ideas could compete freely. But impact is measured by whether children feel safe, whether families stay together, whether democracy functions. And by those measures, I failed. The shift from intentions to outcomes represents a mature understanding of responsibility that has been largely absent from Musk's public statements. Do you regret the acquisition? Musk is quiet for nearly a minute, an extraordinary length of time in television. When he finally speaks, his voice carries the weight of profound recognition. I regret believing that complex social problems could be solved through technological disruption alone. I regret dismantling systems that I didn't fully understand. I regret letting personal grievances drive decisions that affected millions of people. The list of regrets is comprehensive and unqualified. And the $44 billion? Money can be replaced. Trust is harder to rebuild. Institutions take generations to develop and can be destroyed in months. I destroyed something valuable and haven't been able to replace it with anything better. The admission represents perhaps the most expensive lesson in humility in business history. What would you do differently? I would have spent time understanding the existing systems before dismantling them. I would have consulted experts in content moderation, in human psychology, in democratic institutions. I would have moved slowly and measured impact carefully. Instead of assuming that good intentions and engineering thinking were sufficient to solve fundamentally human problems. As the interview approaches its climax, Piers asks the question that has been building throughout their conversation. Elon, given everything you now understand about the harm that has been caused, what are you going to do about it? Musk straightens in his chair for the first time in the past hour, as if the question has given him something concrete to focus on beyond his own failures. I'm going to rebuild the content moderation systems I dismantled, he says with quiet determination. Not the old systems, something better, more transparent, more accountable, but with the understanding that some content is genuinely harmful and needs to be limited. The commitment represents a complete reversal of his previous position on content moderation. How? By hiring back experienced content moderation professionals, by creating transparent appeals processes, by acknowledging that free speech absolutism doesn't work in practice because it allows the loudest, most aggressive voices to silence everyone else. Each element of his plan directly addresses criticisms that have been leveled against his management of the platform. What about the misinformation problem? I'm going to restore fact-checking labels, but with better transparency about who makes those decisions and why. I'm going to slow down the algorithmic promotion of unverified claims. And I'm going to accept that sometimes being wrong about restricting content is better than being wrong about amplifying harmful lies. The acknowledgement that caution is sometimes preferable to permissiveness represents a fundamental shift in philosophy. And the advertiser exodus? I'm going to acknowledge that brands have legitimate concerns about being associated with toxic content. I'm going to work to rebuild trust by demonstrating that the platform can be both open to diverse viewpoints and responsible about preventing harm. The recognition that advertisers aren't enemies of free speech, but stakeholders in healthy discourse, is significant. Some critics will say this is too little, too late, that the damage to democratic institutions, to social cohesion, to people's faith in technology companies is irreversible. They might be right, Musk admits. Some damage might be permanent, but the alternative to trying to fix it is accepting that it stays broken. Why should people believe this? Transformation is genuine rather than just damage control? Because, Musk responds, looking directly into the camera for the first time, I'm willing to admit that I was wrong. Not misunderstood, not the victim of unfair criticism, but fundamentally wrong about how to balance free speech with social responsibility. The direct admission to the global audience carries weight precisely because of Musk's previous unwillingness to accept blame. I thought being the richest person in the world meant my ideas were automatically valuable, I thought disrupting industries meant I could disrupt social norms without consequences. I thought engineering solutions could solve human problems. Each misconception is stated clearly and without qualification. What I learned is that some institutions exist for good reasons, that expertise matters, especially in areas outside your domain, that good intentions without wisdom can cause more harm than malicious actions with limited reach. The lessons learned represent a comprehensive acknowledgement of the limitations of technological solutionism. What do you want people to take away from this conversation? That being wrong isn't the end of the world if you're willing to learn from it. That admitting mistakes isn't weakness. It's the first step toward actually solving problems rather than just creating new ones. He pauses, then continues with growing conviction. And that social media platforms aren't just technology companies. They're digital infrastructure for democracy, for community, for human connection. They need to be run with that responsibility in mind, not just as tools for disruption or profit. Last question. Piers says gently, "Do you think you can rebuild what you've broken?" "I don't know," Musk responds honestly. "Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. But I have an obligation to try, because the alternative is accepting that I spent $44 billion to make the world a worse place." The interview ends not with redemption, but with recognition of harm caused, mistakes made, and work that needs to be done. As the cameras stop rolling, Elon Musk sits in his chair looking both humbled and determined, like a man who has seen the full scope of his failures and chosen to confront them rather than rationalize them away. Whether this transformation will prove genuine, whether his actions will match his words, whether the damage to X and to digital discourse can be repaired, these questions can only be answered by sustained effort over time. But in this studio, on this night, one of the most powerful men in technology offered something rare in Silicon Valley culture: complete accountability, acknowledgement of expertise beyond his own, and recognition that some problems require humility rather than disruption to solve. The silence that follows contains the weight of lessons learned at enormous cost and the possibility that even the most expensive mistakes can become valuable if they lead to wisdom. Time will tell whether Elon Musk's Twitter acquisition becomes a cautionary tale about unchecked tech power or a transformation story about learning from catastrophic failure. Tonight, both futures remain possible.